I think the Double Cherry deserves this. Cherries have a weird history in gaming. They'll randomly appear as a collectible for points throughout video games, famously starting from Pac-Man on the arcade. But even in real-world slot machines, while the 7 became the representation for a jackpot, the cherry was always considered a small reward. I feel like in so many games throughout my life, there's just a random cherry that you can collect and it doesn't really do anything, but it does make things better for some reason or another. And you never really think much of it. It's just kind of there. Would anybody notice if they were completely taken away? Probably not. But seeing how long they've managed to stick around is kinda nice. I don't recall if there were any cherries in the Donkey Kong arcade titles, but I do know as far back as Super Mario Bros. 2 you could collect 5 cherries to get a Starman, and of course they also appeared in the slots. Famously in the Game Boy Advance remake, when you pick up a cherry, your character would yell lucky. The cherries were actually such an integral part of Super Mario Bros. 2 that in Super Smash Bros. When you're fighting on the Mushroom Kingdom 2 stage, there are actually cherries in the background. They're always there, we just don't really think much of them. That is until apparently one of the staff members during the development of Mario 3D World accidentally created 2 Marios while they were using the placement tool. This led to a chain of discussions and thoughts in which they decided that would actually be a good stage gimmick power-up to implement. I'm not sure who came up with the idea of the double cherry itself representing that power, but I actually think it's a phenomenal idea. They're an item that's been around in the Mario franchise and gaming for a very long time, and that whole side-by-side twin thing kinda carries over. It's one of those things that makes so much sense you're surprised nobody really thought about it before. And it ends up being an emblem that's relevant for the retro appeal as well as the modern appeal, since 3D World was ported over to the Switch. It's also one of only 2 or 3 different emblems that are actually red, which is kind of funny because the first one, the Mushroom Cup, and Mario are red, so you'd think there'd be more of that. Either way, I'm glad this emblem was included, and I think it's placed in the right place. This is where something like the Double Cherry would belong. Something a bit more obscure that not many people have really thought about in a long time. Right there, nice and comfortable by the Fruit Cup and the Boomerang Cup and the Acorn Cup. Of course, the Feather Cup being right next to those is absolutely insulting, but we can skip that for now because I talked about it enough previously. This is the third last cup of Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. We are getting close to the end here, and Mario Galaxy is coming up shortly after. These are all of the previous scores that I've done so far, and as we're getting close to wrapping up, I want you guys to remember that I upload every day at 11 AM Eastern Time. You can skip the line if you don't feel like waiting for the uploads by joining my Patreon. And even if you don't pledge, you can still be a free member so you can see how many videos I have coming up. With all the housekeeping items out of the way, let's get started. The Cherry Cup is the second cup in this booster pass that has 2 tour tracks. It starts off with Los Angeles Laps. The second track is the Game Boy Advance's Sunset Wilds. The third track is Koopa Cape from the Nintendo Wii. And the fourth track is Vancouver Velocity from Tour. I'm repeating myself a little bit from a couple of segments ago, but I don't think it was a good idea to have 2 tour tracks from the same region. I'm not going to imply that these are going to be redundant just yet, but when this happened a few segments ago, it ended up being way too redundant. Let's see if the same thing happens here. The Grand Prix starts off with Los Angeles Laps, which I actually think is a very unique track in and of itself. It shares many of the same aesthetics as some of the more tropical courses throughout the game. I think it's really cool that you're driving on a beach and you can see the cityscape in the background. There are a few segments where you are driving on a road, but the road mostly feels like you're actually driving near the coast. Actually, maybe I shouldn't say a few sections, there's a large chunk of it that ends up being on the road. And while you do get to fly over Dodger Stadium and then make your way throughout some of the tighter streets and go through the manufacturing areas, I still feel like if they put more effort on the boardwalk and the beach theme, this track would have been a lot more enjoyable. Because as it stands right now, it feels like it's a track that starts off really fun and then kind of gets a little bit dull as you go on. Not dull enough where I would groan at playing it, but dull enough where I feel like I wouldn't give it 3 points. I think as far as aesthetics and attention to detail, it does a pretty good job, giving you the LA feel, but I think that's pretty basic across the tour tracks. This is a solid 1-pointer for me. I feel like if they stuck around the beach and designed everything the way that they had the opening with the boardwalks, would have been much more fun. Moving on from Los Angeles Laps, we end up at Sunset Wilds, a Game Boy Advance remake. I'm not sure what it is about this one, and it might just be fatigue from all of the tracks prior to it, making it feel a little bit too redundant, but I can't quite figure out how I want to score this. On one hand, I feel like it is a fun track to play. It's one of those competitive ones where you really gotta focus while you're actually playing it. The problem is the track is basically made up of 3, maybe 4 sharp turns, with a little bit of a stage gimmick in between it. You basically first have to dodge the little slippery spots, make a big turn, and then try to aim for the boost pads, and then make another big turn and have to dodge the obstacles like the Shy Guys on the track, and then your final big turn leads to 2 ramps. I think the issue I have with this is that after you make those sharp turns, the actual stage challenges are not all that enticing. Dodging the Shy Guys, okay, that's fine, but the speed boosts and the ramps, you're just basically going straight at that point. It ends up taking a map that what could have felt more competitive with maybe a few swivels along the road or bigger obstacles in the way, and turning it into something that I feel is just a little bit too simple. It's not a 0-pointer by any means, I still think it's fun to play through, but I think the simplicity here takes it from being a 3-pointer to a 1-pointer. And again, I won't rule out that this might just be fatigue. Perhaps if this was an earlier classic track, I might have given it a full score, but I didn't determine the order of which these Grand Prix would be released. That being said, this whole fatigue discussion is only speculation and theoretical. I'm still fairly confident in my opinion to give this 1 point, and I'm still fairly confident in the previous ones that I gave 3 points being deserving of those 3 points. But now, let's move on to the Nintendo Wii's Koopa Cape. If somebody doesn't absolutely love this track, I would genuinely question if they even like Mario Kart. There are tracks that I think are phenomenal that I would understand if somebody didn't like, but Koopa Cape is not one of them. This one isn't even like a top 10 or 15 track for me, but it's one that I will always play and always enjoy when I play. I think it's just so properly designed, there's a lot going on, and they got an underwater half pipe for goodness sake, and it helps that it's fun to look at too. The whole rush of driving on top of the water and then making your way down to the underwater segment was so memorable and fun, and even till now, on occasion it gets exhilarating. And I think there's a lot about this track that could have been considered redundant, but the implementation of the see-through floor that you're driving when you're underwater, letting you view all the details they put in below, was obviously more impressive on the Wii, but it's still fun to look at over here. Koopa Cape earns its 3 points, and we move on to Vancouver Velocity. Alright, straight up, this one's phenomenal. And I'm not just saying that because I was born in Canada. Unlike other tour tracks where I feel like it's unique for 1 or 2 laps, and has a 3rd lap which feels too similar to the other tour stuff, this one keeps it fresh all throughout, with really the only samey moments being right before and right after the finish line. First off, Vancouver Velocity ends up being a nighttime snow theme, both underutilized in all of the tour stuff. Second, a lot of the road consists of brick, so you don't always feel like you're driving on the same road in every track. You also get to drive over the narrow suspension bridge, which is one of the most iconic tour sites in Vancouver. The second lap takes you onto boardwalks and through the park, before letting you fly right into Mario Arena, but it's Rogers Arena. I feel like they got as close as possible without nearing copyright infringement. You get to skate through the rink and dodge Shy Guys, before heading down through the tunnel, dodging bats, getting out through another narrow segment of road, once again skating past the Shy Guys, and taking the snaky path to the finish line. What can I say? I felt like this one was unique enough that it deserved me to actually run through it. I didn't want to say that Vancouver Velocity and Los Angeles laps are totally diverse without justifying it. Because let me tell you, most other tour tracks, even if there were 2 in the same Grand Prix, it would be hard for me to justify most of them. At minimum, the aesthetic would get repetitive. That being said, Vancouver Velocity does earn itself 3 points. The issue I'm having here is determining the difficulty curve. I know for a fact that Sunset Wilds is the easiest one, so already it's not going to gain that point. But they did place Koopa Cape after it, so when looking at the retro stuff, they got those 2 in the right order. The question is whether or not Los Angeles Laps and Vancouver Velocity are in the right order. I feel like Los Angeles Laps has a difficult first and third lap with a second lap that's laughably easy. Vancouver Velocity has a lot more twists and turns throughout, but I feel like the road itself does a good job keeping players on track. It feels like it's not really all that hard, if anything Koopa Cape might be harder, but I'm not sure if Los Angeles Laps would be considered harder than Vancouver Velocity. At most they'd be a tie. So while I'm still going to take the point away for the difficulty curve, because at the end of the day Nintendo is not forced to have the tour track starting into the cup, and if they want to stick with that, they're not forced to have Sunset Wilds and Koopa Cape being the 2 tracks in between them. So while I am still going to take the point away, I do think it is a bit harsh because of the rules. I also don't feel as bad doing it because it's not like this is a 16-point course that's becoming 15 because of that rule. So it is what it is. But let's quickly recap and wrap this one up. Los Angeles Laps gets a single point. Sunset Wilds gets a single point. Koopa Cape gets 3 points. And Vancouver Velocity gets 3 points. 0 points for the difficulty curve. 3 points for the diversity. The Cherry Cup earns itself 11 points. Next up is the penultimate cup of the game, the Acorn Cup.